Journey of a Sister, Year 2.
Undoing the Indoctrination.
Suzanne learns from Conversations with God Book 1 that in order to undo the indoctrination she had received around sex and money, she had to reverse the thought, word, deed process. In other words, she had to do the act, then have a new thought about it. So now, whenever she makes love with Charles, she thinks about how wonderful the experience is and how it's the best gift God gave. Instead of thinking she's doing something wrong, she now thinks about how right it feels. On one occasion, she spontaneously exclaimed, "I love sex," during their lovemaking. "You don't have to tell me that," Charles groaned as he chastised her with his rod of correction. Over time, she began to feel better about having sex with the man she loves, and the feelings of guilt and condemnation passed away. She did the same thing around money. Whereas she had been taught to believe that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, she now goes by her own experience of having money. The more she has, the better she feels. When she doesn't have enough money, she feels anxious, worried and stressed. So she develops new thoughts and habits. Whenever she receives money, no matter how small or large, she says, "I love money and money loves me." Instead of putting 10% of her income in the offering bowl, she now saves it. Since she is made in the image and likeness of the great I Am, she figures she should give to herself first, as God doesn't need her money. She enjoys watching her money seeds grow bigger and bigger in her savings account, which makes her feel good. She also sows money seeds,
as according to the law of sowing and reaping, in order to receive a harvest, she must first plant a seed.
She also teaches her boys how to save so they won't develop a poverty mentality. Even though the love of money is supposedly the root of all evil, from Suzanne's experience, it's the lack of money that's the root of all evil. Open invitation. The house phone rings. It's Charles. "Hi babes, how are you?" he greets Suzanne cheerfully.
"I'm good, thanks. How are you?"
She responds happily. "I'm great. I was just wondering, what are you doing tomorrow evening?" "Oh, I'm attending a networking event with a friend." "Is that a male friend or female?"
he asks suspiciously.
"Female? Why?" "Oh, I just thought you might be free, that's all." "What about Wednesday?" "Let me check my diary." Suzanne pauses for a moment, knowing full well she has nothing planned. "Looks like I'll be free. What did you have in mind?" "Oh, I just thought I might come over to chill and relax, you know." He seems to be getting into a comfortable routine with still no commitment from him. I'm not even 100% sure I'm the only woman he's seeing. I do enjoy his company, though. "Sure, why not?" she agrees. "I'm going to give him a night to remember. Dinner, a Tyler Perry DVD, and then sex." The preparation. After Suzanne showers and creams her skin, she dabs a line of her favourite goddess oil, Lover's Attraction, in dots from behind her ear down to her groin area, hoping Charles will join them up. As she prepares for his arrival, she dances to Shalimar's A Night to Remember, playing on her stereo. He arrives at 8:15 p.m, looking drained, but carrying a bunch of orchids and a bottle of red wine. Suzanne shows her appreciation with a kiss as he hands them to her. "Thank you. Sorry I'm late. I had to finish some tax returns." "Are you hungry?"
"Starving. I haven't eaten since lunchtime. What did you cook?"
Suzanne heads towards the kitchen with Charles in tow. "Lentil soup with sweet potatoes, yam, pumpkin, kale. No meat?" "No, I'm cutting down on the amount of meat I eat." "How do the boys feel about that?" "A man like me can't live on rabbit food, you know. I need my protein." He flexes his arm muscles. Suzanne laughs. "You don't only get protein from meat, you know. Animals get their protein from the plants they eat." Charles looks in the pot as she stirs the soup. Looks good though." "How was your day?" she asks as she stirs. "Don't ask. Terrible. I don't want to bore you with it though. I'd rather just forget about it all for a while." As he hugs her from behind, she can feel pride rising. She moves her body out of pride's reach. "It's ready. Come and sit down." She empties the warm soup into a bowl and places it on the table. Charles sits down to eat. While he's slurping, Suzanne gets an idea. She heads to the bathroom and begins running a bath, adding some Epsom salts with lavender and chamomile essential oils. The sound of the running water starts her inspiration flowing. She gets her notebook and pen and writes,
As you walk in, I can feel your passion rising, but you're not ready for me. See, you're still carrying the negative energy you picked up along the way during your day. So let me run you a bath and help you wash all your troubles away. Leave behind all the pressures of life, the worries and strife, the drama, the bills, and enter, if you will, into my queendom.
The words flow as easily onto the page as the water into the bath. By the time it's filled, Suzanne finishes writing her poem. She titles it, The Preparation. She lights some candles and places them around the bath, which creates a warm, ambient glow to help relax his mind and body. Finally, she starts the CD, which she had compiled earlier. With the relaxing music playing and the bath ready, she returns to the living room. Charles has finished his soup. That was lovely, not too filling either. She takes him by the hand and leads him to the bathroom. He smiles at the scene she has created. "Get naked," she commands in a soft-spoken voice. He only needs to be told once. Before you can say Jack Robinson, Charles is stark as. She watches as he eases himself into the bath, then turns to leave. "Aren't you joining me?" he calls out. "Not yet. You relax first." Charles leans back and closes his eyes. The sound of Erykah Badu singing Orange Moon soothes his psyche. He relaxes into the aromatherapy. 15 minutes later, Suzanne returns with a sarong tied around her. She loosens it and hangs it up behind the door. Charles opens his eyes and sits up. She gets in the bath, sitting behind him so he can rest his head on her chest. "How are you feeling now?" "Much better, thanks. You really know how to make a man feel like a king." "Well, you're my king." She slowly washes his body down before pulling the plug. While the water drains, she proceeds to shower him down to get rid of any residual negative energy, dirt and soap. Finally, she rubs his body down with a soft, clean towel. Letting his manhood lead the way like a divining rod, Charles follows Suzanne into her queendom. She takes another large towel and places it on the bed before instructing him to lie on his front. Charles obeys willingly. With his head resting to one side and his eyes closed, he waits in eager anticipation. Suzanne straddles him and pours some aphrodisiac love potion massage oil into one hand before rubbing them both together. She uses her thumbs to get into the deep tissue muscle between his shoulders to get rid of all the knots. Charles encourages her to go deeper. He can feel the tension easing as she applies pressure to the area between his shoulder blades, as if she's kneading dough to make bread. To bring his energies back into balance, she gives him a spinal flush. First, she loosens his back muscles by massaging down both sides of his spine, applying her body weight to get pressure. Then, using her thumbs again, she massages between the notches of his vertebrae, from the base of his neck all the way down to his sacrum. Staying on each point for a few seconds, she massages his skin in circular motions, pressing each point with firm pressure. When she reaches the bottom of his spine, she goes back to the top and repeats the process to ensure she has released all the congestion which has been blocking the flow of his vital energies. To complete the flush, Suzanne brushes her open palms down the length of his back in a sweeping motion, admiring the way his mahogany skin glistens from the oil she's administering. She then massages the back of his neck, arms, buttocks and legs before helping him roll onto his back. Charles opens his eyes. "Your turn," he offers. "I haven't finished yet. I'm probably enjoying this as much as you." Rubbing some more oil in her hands, she gently massages his temples, face, head and neck. She then proceeds down to his shoulders, chest, arms and hands, giving each finger a gentle pull. As she continues down his torso, she admires his six-pack and the defined lines in his groin, which turn her on even more, but she's determined to finish the job in hand. She massages his thighs, calves and feet, finishing off by applying pressure to the points in the soles of his feet. "You've missed something," he murmurs. "What?" she asks naively. She knows what he means, but pretends she doesn't. He takes pride in his hand and wiggles it at her. He's feeling left out. Suzanne laughs and addresses Pride playfully. "Oh, you feeling neglected? Let me see what I can do about that then." She takes Pride in her oiled hand and gently begins sliding her fingers up and down its shaft while using a twisting action. Charles lets out a grateful moan. He had long since taught Suzanne how to handle his family jewels. She grips and pulls his balls back gently with one hand, stretching the skin which he'd told her creates even greater sensitivity. She then continues to massage his tightened shaft, using slow, then fast wrist action with the other hand. "Oh, damn, that feels so good," he moans. She quickens her pace, alternating between squeezing and stroking. His breathing becomes erratic. "Shit!" he cries out. By now, he's writhing as if in agony, unable to control himself. Suzanne can tell he's about to come, so she presses a finger on the large vein on the underside of Pride near the scrotum and squeezes his shaft at its base. When Charles has regained control, she mounts him. "Oh, yeah!" She begins riding him. When the entire length of his shaft is up inside her, she pauses. Charles raises his head to see why she has stopped. Leaning forward with her hands on either side of his head on the bed, she looks him in the eyes. "Are you enjoying this?" "Why do you even think you need to ask? Of course I am." "Good, because I aim to please." She begins riding him again, sliding up and down with ease. Charles watches her breasts bounce up and down like two gazelles. He cups them with his hands, offering them support. The look on her face as she lets herself go says it all. She's in complete ecstasy. Suddenly, in one quick movement, he takes control and flips her over onto all fours, grabbing her hips. He proceeds to give it to her hot and cool, fast and slow, wicked and wild. One moment pushing and grinding urgently, the next more soft, slow, tender and deep. Between her soft sighs and his heavy breathing, their lovemaking matches the R&B tracks filling the room. Jill Scott's Crown Royal is now playing. "Make me come," she demands passionately, forcing him to drive even faster and deeper. As she surrenders her body to him fully, the exhilarating elixir she's radiating fills his nostrils, completely consuming him. "Fucking hell!" he cries out as he climaxes. "I'd rather fucking heaven," she giggles. They collapse in a heap of oily skin and sweat. Charles feels totally rejuvenated. Another level? They awake in a warm, sticky embrace. "Good morning, my queen," Charles whispers in her ear as she stretches, opening her eyes. "Good morning. You've never called me that before." "Well, if I'm your king, that makes you my queen, doesn't it?" "I guess so." "Boy, last night was phenomenal. You blew my mind." Suzanne laughs. "It takes two, you know." She decides to see if she can get him to commit while he's in a good mood. "Babe, we've been dating for over a year now. Where do you see us going from here?" "What do you mean?" "Where do you see this relationship going?" She makes herself clear. "Let's just go with the flow and see where it takes us, shall we?" he responds calmly. But she's beginning to feel impatient. When is he finally going to be ready to commit? She asks herself. He kisses her gently on the forehead, giving her breast a squeeze before getting up to use the bathroom. As she watches him stride across the room naked, a random line for a poem pops into her head. She quickly jolts it down.
Your legs are like two pillars, strong and muscular. And when you walk, you remind me of a black panther.
Charles has unwittingly become her muse. Suzanne always has a notebook to hand, ready for when those moments of inspiration strike, like lightning. If she doesn't write it down straight away, she can't guarantee she'll always remember it later. She can hear Charles in the shower, singing away to himself. She jumps up from the bed, quick steps towards the bathroom, and taps on the shower screen door. "May I join you?" He squints through the soap around his eyes and smiles broadly. "Be my guest." Suzanne pulls a plastic cap over her weave and steps in with her back to him. Charles welcomes her by wrapping his arms around her from behind and begins soaping her body to match his. Using both hands, he soaps her back, shoulders, breasts, stomach, arms and thighs before slipping a hand between her legs. Suzanne lets out a soft moan. He removes the shower head from its holder and, kneeling in front of her, carefully parts her labia and begins watering her flower, watching as her clitoris hardens. Aroused, he leans forward and begins to lick and suck it. Suzanne moans and writhes as she struggles to hold on to the bathroom tiles to prevent herself from slipping. Her knees begin to give way. Just as she's about to collapse, Charles stands up, places the shower head back on its holder, and lifts her onto his erection. She begins gyrating on pride while Charles supports her weight with his muscular legs. It isn't long before he gives a deep-throated groan of gratitude as he comes, while she gives a kind of sigh of relief. As they leave the shower together, Charles makes a suggestion. "What do you want to do today? We can either stay in and chill or go shopping." "Shopping? For what?" "Well, what do you need?" Suzanne thinks he's joking, so decides to play along. "That depends on my budget." "Would £250 be enough?" Suzanne is shocked. No man she's ever dated has spent that much money on her before. "Are you serious? £250? "Yep. Today's all about you, babe. Whatever you need, we'll go get it, as long as you stick within the budget." "I take it that doesn't include a ring then?" "You don't need a ring, hun. You want one." "What's wrong with that?" Suzanne wraps a towel round herself, while Charles towels himself down and walks back to the bedroom naked. "Nothing, I guess. Everything in divine timing. Oh, pack a bag. We're going out tonight. You might as well stay over at my place." Suzanne looks up at him gratefully. "I love you, you know." "Yeah, I love you too. Now, let's get moving." He slaps her playfully on the bum. They arrive at Charles's house, laden with bags of shopping. He has bought Suzanne a new outfit to wear that night and even treated her to some new underwear. Victoria's Secret! She opens one of the bags, takes out her new dress and holds it up against her body. "So where are we going tonight?" "To watch Why Did I Get Married? You said you wanted to see it, didn't you?" "Oh, you booked it. What time's the screening?" 8 o'clock. She glances at the time. "We'd better get a move on. It's already after 6. Suzanne has her shower first. While Charles is having his, she brushes her weave and applies her makeup. He has a habit of leaving the shower glistening wet, with just a small towel wrapped around his waist. Admiring his physique, a few lines pop into Suzanne's mind.
Look at you, standing tall and strong, brilliantly black, sun-kissed skin with beautiful eyes for looking in, sweet lips for kissing. Your lips so make kindred words so nourishing.
What are you writing? He asks. Oh, nothing. Just an idea for a poem. She scribbles shadily into her notebook. He looks at her suspiciously. Is it about me? No. Then let me see. He tries to take a peek. No! He makes a grab for her notebook. I know it's about me. I want to see. They grapple around playfully as he tries to tackle it out of her hands. Okay, I'll show you. Stop! You're messing up my hair! She allows him to take it. He reads the verse and smiles. Suzanne feels embarrassed. I wish I hadn't shown it to you now, she mumbles. Why not? It's a great verse. It shows how deep you think. He hands the notebook back to her. Do you think I should use it in a poem? It's not what I think that matters. It's what you think. Follow your spirit. I'm just glad I could inspire you. He turns and starts oiling his skin. You don't know how much, she thinks, smiling to herself. Awakening his inner child. Charles is an accountant, but secretly he wishes he'd followed his dream of being an artist. He'd been very good at drawing and painting at school, but his father had advised him to study for a proper job if he wanted to be able to support a family in the future. Since he was also good at maths, he had decided accounting was a safer bet and would provide a good, steady income. Charles is excellent at his job, and this is reflected in his pay packet. But still, he feels unfulfilled. His inner child is crying out to be heard. He wants to draw and paint, but he just doesn't seem to be able to find the time. Or is it that he doesn't make the time? He admires Suzanne for holding on to her dreams and not giving in to the rat race. She refuses to go down the 9-to-5 route, and even though money is tight, she certainly seems more fulfilled than him. She believes there's more to life and is determined to follow her bliss at whatever cost. Something has to give, and Suzanne has decided to make whatever sacrifices necessary to achieve her goal of making a living doing what she loves, writing and performing her poetry. Charles can see that despite her low income, she is ambitiously striving towards her goals. She inspires him in more ways than one. Lace seduction. Charles and Suzanne are enjoying a relaxing free weekend together. As they recline on the sofa, Charles admires her strong African Caribbean features in the dim light. Can I paint you? He asks, seemingly out of the blue. Suzanne is taken aback, since he'd never shared his secret passion for art with her before. Paint me? Well, I could start by drawing you, just for fun. She looks at him in surprise. I didn't know you could draw. Well, I haven't done anything in years, but I'm thinking of getting back into it again. And what better way than to start by drawing my favourite lady? She pauses, smiles and shrugs her shoulders. Okay, when? No time like the present. All right then, what are you going to draw on? Charles reaches for his briefcase and takes out a drawing pad, pencil and rubber. Oh, so you had this all planned? Well, I was hoping you'd say yes, and I just thought I'd be prepared. Okay then, let me change into something a bit more interesting. She heads towards her queendom. Before you go, can you lose the wig? I'd prefer to draw you in all your natural beauty. Sure, she replies hesitantly, not feeling sure at all. She doesn't see why Charles would want to draw her with her nappy hair, whereas he doesn't understand why she insists on wearing the wigs and weaves when she has a perfectly good head of natural hair underneath. 15 minutes later, Suzanne returns wearing the Victoria's Secret bodice and thong set he had bought her, coupled with black patent high heels. Because her hair had been in plaits under her wig, it's now a mass of wild curls. Charles eyes her up from top to bottom. Her fro is striking in all its natural, untamed glory. The red and black satin and lace bodice pushes her breasts up, enhancing her cleavage, while the matching thong barely covers her yoni. The whole ensemble drives him crazy. He can feel pride rising, but now's not the right time. Down, boy! Damn, how am I supposed to concentrate with you in that? Come on, be professional about this, Suzanne teases him, strutting sexily over to the couch. How do you want me? She continues to seduce him as she perches herself provocatively on the edge of the sofa, crossing her legs.
This woman,
Charles thinks, smiling to himself. Okay, why don't you kind of lie back, rest on your elbows and drop your head back a bit, he suggests. She gets into the position requested, bending one knee. How long do I have to stay like this? I'm not sure. Do you think you can hold that position? I don't think so. Not for long anyway. Okay, well, you get yourself into a comfortable position and I'll be happy with it. Suzanne rolls onto her right side, props her head up with her right hand and looking at him seductively, rests her left knee in front on the couch. Perfect! Charles calls out as if directing a film. A sudden surge of panic hits him. I haven't drawn anything in years. What if I make a mess of it? What if she doesn't like it and thinks I'm insulting her looks? What if... He has to stop these thoughts from crippling his creativity before he even gets started. I can do this. I'm a good artist. I know she'll like it. With pencil in hand ready to begin, Charles decides to protect his interests for later that night. Babe, before I start, can I just say you're a beautiful work of art yourself, and no matter how this turns out, I couldn't possibly improve on what God has already done naturally. Oh, that's so sweet! Suzanne leaves her position on the sofa and starts making her way towards him. Charles drops his artist's pad and pencil on the floor, ready to receive her. Straddling his lap, she French kisses him full on the lips, wrapping her arms around his neck and her tongue around his tongue. He grabs each of her bum cheeks, pressing her against his hard-on. Suddenly, she breaks away. Okay, let's get back to business. You've got a drawing to do, remember? As she slowly meanders her way back to the sofa, Suzanne takes a fresh red rose from the bouquet on the table and, getting back into the pose, positions the rose strategically under her nose. Nice touch, Charles says out loud, but secretly he's beginning to wish he'd never asked to draw her. Look at her, all ready for a good sex session, and now I have to spend God knows how long drawing her instead. Mind you, she wouldn't be dressed up like this if I hadn't asked to draw her in the first place. All these thoughts are running through his mind as he sits there staring at her, pencil in hand, ready to begin. Then his imagination begins to run wild as he pictures himself taking her from behind, watching her arse jiggle as he drives pride in and out of her wet vagina with the thong still on, pulling it to one side. Have you started yet? Suzanne bursts his bubble. Oh, yeah, I'm just starting now. Charles puts pencil to paper. Where do I begin? With her eyes, her body, her hair? Before feelings of doubt can set in, his inner child takes over and begins to play by putting bold strokes onto the paper. He allows his inner child the freedom to create. This is fun. Charles feels something inside coming alive as he sets himself free. He does his best to capture not only her outer beauty, but her inner beauty and femininity as well. He emphasizes the fullness of her lips, the sensual curve of her hips, and the ancient seductive look in her eyes. He enjoys drawing her cleavage, accentuated by the tight bodice, and takes time to include the lace detail on the top of her stockings. He then smudges the paper with his finger to get the shine in the black patent shoes she's wearing.
why has she given me all this extra work to do with the rose?
He wonders as he copies each petal carefully. It does add to the composition, though. As he's drawing the thorns on the stem, he thinks about how much a rose is like a woman, beautiful to look at, but hurtful if not handled correctly. Suzanne watches as he focuses entirely upon his work. It's as if he no longer sees her as his woman, but as an object to be studied. She watches him go into his zone and respects it, as she has often been there with her writing. He stares intently at different parts of her body, drawing, rubbing out and drawing again. She decides to use this opportunity to think about the business empire she's planning on building. Some 45 minutes later, Charles announces that he's finished. Suzanne can't wait to see it. She jumps up from the sofa and wiggles over to where he's sitting. As she sits on his lap, she catches sight of it and, taking the drawing from him, gasps, "Oh, Charles, it's beautiful! I had no idea you were this good at drawing." "I'm glad you like it." He breathes a sigh of relief. "Can I keep it?" she asks. He had poured his heart and soul into that drawing, and now she wants to keep it. "I suppose so," he replies reluctantly. Suzanne notices that Charles has titled the drawing Lace Seduction. Nice title." She smiles at him encouragingly. "You have real talent here, Charles. You should take your art more seriously." "Thanks." Noticing he hasn't signed it yet, she asks for his paw print. He signs and dates it and hands it back to her half-heartedly. Placing the drawing on the table, Suzanne wraps her arms around his neck again and, kissing him passionately, gives him what he's been dreaming about all along. Trust. Suzanne loves spending time with Charles. Their relationship is intense and passionate, and their arguments equally so. Sometimes they would have a disagreement and not speak for weeks. Despite this, it's as if the forces of nature keep pulling them back together again. But is it love, obsession, or just a natural reaction to each other's chemistry? On this occasion, they had just spent a lovely weekend together, and now Suzanne hasn't heard from Charles in 2 days. She calls his mobile. No answer. She calls his landline. No answer. Where is he? What's keeping him so busy that he can't even be bothered to call me? He could be out dating other women for all I know. She wants to call his mobile again, but her inner voice is telling her to chillax. The lower, jealous and possessive side of her Scorpio trait wants to rule. So to alleviate the tension she's feeling, she pens a poem song. When we come together, we're like a river flowing effortlessly. Safe in your arms, your embrace is the only protection I need. But we both need time to grow, baby, to develop ourselves individually. So I'm giving you the space that you need, with no expectations for me. She feels much better when she's finished. Her intuition is always telling her to have no expectations of Charles, that expectations inhibit the flow of love, and that the least expectations you have of someone, the more likely they are to surpass them. But having no expectations of him is proving to be difficult. How can she not want more from the relationship when things are going so well? Why shouldn't she expect him to want to take things to the next level? Commitment. That's what she wants. Is that asking too much? Stuff that. Next time he calls, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind, she thinks stubbornly. Later that evening, Charles calls. Hi babes, how are you? He asks cheerfully. Could be better, she replies off-key. Why? What's wrong? He responds, genuinely concerned. I don't think you appreciate me, she blurts out. What makes you say that? He asks, surprised. Well, look, we just spent a lovely weekend together and then you don't even call me for 2 days. Babe, I've been busy. You know my work schedule. What? Too busy to even pick up the phone? Silence. Charles is tired. He only called to hear her voice, and now she's attacking him with it. Charles, are you there? Silence. I know you're listening. Don't ignore me when I'm talking to you.
What do you want me to say?
He asks wearily. Well, you could at least have the decency to answer me when I'm talking to you. Silence. If Suzanne had taken the time to listen to her inner voice, she would have known to stop right there. Maybe if it wasn't her time of the month, she might have handled the situation differently. But no, she keeps on going. How do I even know you're not sleeping with other women? For all I know, you could have a dozen other women out there besides me. Charles feels offended. Babe, you know I'm a one-woman man. So where are you when you're not with me then? Charles wants to remind her that apart from working full-time, he also studies numerology in his spare time and is also learning how to apply universal laws. He had set Suzanne on her path of truth, but he still has his own journey to make as well. So some evenings after work, he'll have a shower, eat dinner, then study for a couple of hours before going to bed. If he was to call her, they would end up on the phone for hours. Texting doesn't work either. After receiving one message from him, she would then try to hold a whole conversation by text. So he would rather wait until he has the time to talk with her properly. But he doesn't tell her that. Sue, I really have to go. I have another long day ahead of me tomorrow. Charles, if you hang up on me, we're through. We'll discuss this at the weekend, okay? I'm serious, Charles. If you hang up on me, it's over. Charles hangs up. In a blind fit of rage, Suzanne deletes his number from her phone. But out of the chaos and confusion, something beautiful is growing, like a rose growing out of a crack in a concrete pavement. Her story, not history. Suzanne enrolls onto a Black History course to learn all about her African ancestry. Her mother had never mentioned anything about originating from Africa, nor did she ever talk about her ancestors or how they ended up in Jamaica. The descendants of enslaved Africans who were taken to America had at least identified themselves as African American. There was no such term as African British or African Jamaican. Even those who remained in the Caribbean didn't call themselves African Caribbean. They seemed to want nothing to do with their African origins. Suzanne is determined to find out what took place during her ancestors' 400 years of enslavement, which had caused their descendants to become so totally disconnected from their roots. She arrives for her first class. The African history teacher is in his mid-50s, dressed in full African garms. Thank you for enrolling onto my course. My name is Dr. Walker, and I'll be taking you on a journey through our history to see how we arrived where we are today. Because as the great Marcus Garvey said, a people who do not know their history are like a tree without roots. He starts his first slide. A symbol of a bird facing backwards with the slogan, "It is not taboo to go back and fetch what you have forgotten," underneath. He asks, "Does anybody know what this symbol is?" A young man raises his hand. "A Sankofa bird. It's an Adinkra symbol from Ghana, West Africa." Dr. Walker commends him. "Very good, Stefan. Now this will be the symbol you'll see me use throughout the course as a constant reminder that it's not taboo to go back and fetch what you have forgotten. Next week we will watch the film Sankofa. Some of you might find it disturbing, but it's the foundation upon which I've built this course. Does anyone have any questions?" Suzanne raises her hand. "Yes, Suzanne? I was just wondering, is it necessary to watch the film if it's disturbing?" "I wouldn't have included it if it wasn't. In order for you to understand why you're the way you are today, you need to get to the root cause of your issues. Many of us are still carrying trauma from our ancestors in our DNA, passed down to us genetically. Remember, you're only watching it. They lived it. Now, has any of you read the Willie Lynch letter?" A few people raised their hands. "Those of you who haven't, that will be your homework before the next lesson." A young woman raises her hand. "Where can we get it from?" "You should be able to download it from the internet as a free PDF. Or I can email it to you." "Great, thank you." Suzanne makes a note of it as well. Dr. Walker continues. Now, even though the letter was actually written by a black psychologist, it gives an accurate description of how white enslavers developed a brutal system to physically and psychologically traumatize our ancestors, to break them down mentally in order to reprogram their mind to believe that they were the inferior race. Religion was their main weapon, along with barbaric acts such as whippings, rape, amputations, castrations, and of course, lynchings. Throughout this course, we're going to look at how this system is still being used today in a more covert way. Unless we can see that we're still in mental slavery, we won't be able to free our minds. We'll be studying the Willie Lynch letter as part of this course. The young woman, Grace, raises her hand again. Are you saying Christianity was created by slave traders? No, but they used the Bible to keep our ancestors submissive to them. They didn't allow their captives to read and write, and only quoted scriptures that benefited themselves, such as, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect, fear, and sincerity of heart," while deliberately leaving out the following verse which told slave masters to treat their captives the same way. But we're jumping ahead of ourselves. We'll be covering this in Lesson 3. For now, all you need to know is that our ancestors' 400 years of enslavement is still affecting the lives of their descendants today. Trauma like that doesn't just disappear because slavery was abolished. If you show me your religion, I'll show you your conqueror. Molefi Keti Asante. Stolen History. In her African history classes, Suzanne learns how the economies of the British and other European countries were built using the blood, sweat and tears of her ancestors and the natural resources of her motherland. As the descendant of an enslaved African, she had been robbed of her heritage, true identity, inheritance, land and spirituality. In their place, she had been given a white man's name, a council property, and a religion that held her in mental bondage. She had forgotten who she was as a black woman, and therefore had nothing to pass down to future generations. But now she's discovering her rich history before slavery. Suzanne learns that her ancient ancestors were from Kemet, which means land of the blacks. It had been renamed Egypt after it was invaded in the 11th dynasty, 332 years before Christ. Dr. Walker clearly explains how the ancient Cometians had been very advanced in their knowledge of the sciences, including philosophy, physics, chemistry, astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and the healing arts. They developed the first writings known as hieroglyphs, the first paper known as papyrus, constructed complex buildings such as the pyramids, understood how the universe works, how frequencies in music can heal the mind and body, and how the soul journeys after death. The mistake they made was to share this knowledge with anyone who travelled there in search of enlightenment. Thousands of Europeans flocked to Kemet to study in their mystery schools, long before Jesus came on the scene. Imhotep, the world's first recorded multi-genius, lived in the 4th dynasty to around 2648 BC. He was revered for his superior skills in architecture, physics, pharmacy, astronomy, poetry, mathematics, and spiritual wisdom. Soon after his death, he became venerated as the god of medicine and wisdom. Greek scholars such as Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and Herodotus all accredited their Kemetic education as the source of their wisdom. Socrates went down in Greek history as a founding father of Western philosophy, yet it's a known fact that he spent 15 years studying in Kemet before returning to Greece and rising to fame as a result of his newfound knowledge. Not only did Socrates plagiarize work from Imhotep, he also admitted to plagiarizing the work of the Ethiopian philosopher Aesop. A whole new range of ideas emerged as European schools of thought, including the Socratic method, Pythagoras' theorem, the Hippocratic Oath, and Thales' axiom. These were all plagiarized from ancient Kemetic educational and philosophical systems. They tried to rewrite history and claim that the ancient Egyptians looked like them.
Fortunately, legendary scholars like Dr. Cheek Anta Diop
went to great length to demonstrate that the ancient Kemetians looked no different from any other black Africans south of the Sahara. He also used linguistics, anthropology, and history to demonstrate that the ancient Egyptians were in fact black. Ironically, as early as 300 BC, Aristotle and many of the other early Greek scholars had themselves described the Kemetians as having black skin with woolly hair. Alexander the Greek was another European enlightened by the priests of Kemet.
He pretended to be a devoted worshipper of African deities.
But after learning all he could from the priests, he burned down their universities, stole their manuscripts, and took them back to Greece, where he set up his own library. For this, he called himself great. He also stole several artifacts and spiritual artworks from the ancient tombs during his conquest, such as the Black Madonna and Child, Osset, and Heru, the original mother and son, which he renamed Isis and Horus.
Soon after Alexander the Greek's death,
the Roman Empire began to emerge as a political powerhouse. The Romans were heavily influenced by their predecessors, inheriting many of the philosophies and religious practices from the Greeks, who had taken many of their concepts from ancient Kemet. Alexander's worship of the African goddess Isis spread into much of Rome under the guise of the Alexandrian Mysteries of Isis. This religious group went on to gain much power and influence in the Vatican, as well as many other institutions throughout Europe. The worship of Isis and Horus, known as the Son of God, was very popular in ancient Rome. When Roman Catholicism became the dominant religion, these statues were renamed Mary and Jesus, and many were whitewashed into the image and likeness of Europeans. However, some of the original statues of a black Isis holding her black son Horus survived and can still be found in Italy, France, Spain, and other European countries, depicting the very dark-skinned Black Madonna and Christ. Dr. Walker explained that being the most authentic and sacred artifacts of early Roman Catholic culture, the continued worship of these artifacts by prominent Catholic priests and members of the global Catholic Church speaks volumes about the importance and origins of these deities. Why would they tell us to worship a white male, then worship the Black Madonna themselves? Suzanne asks in one of her classes. Ah, now you're asking the right questions, Dr. Walker replies. The history of Christianity. Suzanne learns about the ancient Kemetic religion, which was based on the principles of Ma'at: truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice. The ancient Egyptians had no need for police, courts, armies, or a criminal justice system. They lived by universal laws.
by living in accordance with the laws of nature,
they lived in peace, love, harmony, and abundance. After the 11th dynasty invasion, things were never the same again. Ancient Kemet slowly declined into a remnant of its former glory. The esoteric knowledge taught by the priests was stolen and kept within a select few. They formed secret societies where they put what they learned into practice, which enabled them to gain vast wealth for themselves. With this occult, hidden knowledge, they became very powerful, but it wasn't enough. They wanted to become all-powerful, like God. So they created new religions and holy books, using the knowledge plagiarized from the stolen manuscripts, but omitted any information that would empower the masses to be able to create heaven on earth. This new religion had a few aims and objectives: to remove the divine feminine, to blame Eve for the fall of humanity, to make women subservient to men, to give men more power and authority, to divide and conquer the black race, to suppress their sexual energy, their power. Dr. Walker said the purpose of their new religions was to enslave the minds of the masses and become even more rich and powerful than the ancient Commissions. They were particularly aimed at Africans and their descendants to make them forget who they are, a form of mind control, to suppress their sexuality, a form of population control, and to cripple their finances, economic control. They had learned about the creative power of thoughts and that the unconscious mind responds best to images. They knew that in order to gain world domination, they would need to use the minds of the collective consciousness and get them to create their new world order. By writing certain prophecies into their holy books and promoting them far and wide, believers would actually play a big part in causing the events to happen. The original creation story taught by the ancient Commissions included a father, Osar, a mother, Oset, and a son, Heru, who the Greeks renamed Osiris, Isis, and Horus. The masculine and feminine were equally balanced, which gave birth to new life. But while devising their new holy books, European scholars removed the Divine Mother from the creation story and blamed the woman for the fall of humanity, which led to women throughout the Bible being treated like second-class citizens. Jesus and the Apostle Paul didn't marry and encouraged their disciples to do the same. Women had no rights, were bought like property, and were even told they were unclean during their monthly cycle. Instead of sexuality being celebrated, converts were told to abstain from sex. This had led to a suppression of sexual energy, a dynamic, creative force. Suzanne had herself noticed countless instances of male chauvinism in the Bible, but now it was becoming apparent that there was a covert war against the divine feminine. But why? Dr. Walker, rather than giving his students all the answers, invited them to do their own research so they could discuss it in the next lesson. Suzanne discovers that King James, who commissioned the King James Version of the Bible, was a known homosexual. Even though he married a woman, he openly had male lovers and even had his wife killed. Even though she loves God, Suzanne realizes it's her fear of going to hell that has kept her in the faith. Those who had organized this religion had stolen, killed, enslaved, raped, murdered with no conscience. Did they know something she didn't? Know thyself. Modern European ideologies make no mention of Africans' contributions to Western civilizations. They had been whitewashed out of history, unless it had to do with slavery. That's one part of history they wished to keep alive. European scholars had gone out of their way to conceal the overwhelming evidence of ancient black civilizations, including claiming Egypt isn't in Africa and whitewashing all the pharaohs and queens. Europeans simply couldn't fathom the idea that the people they had so successfully conquered and enslaved could possibly have had anything to do with Europe's rise to intellectual and economical greatness. It was an inconvenient truth which didn't advance their plan of white supremacy. In order to get Africans to forget their greatness, Europeans had devised a long-term plan through the process of slavery and colonialism, which would ensure that they gained the upper hand. Africans had their own part to play in their demise. They were too trusting and too willing to share their knowledge with outsiders. Dr. Walker broke down the process of slavery and colonialism to show how they had systematically been used to break down the psyche of Africans to believe they were inferior in order to put Europeans in a position of power. The first thing they did was to try and destroy all evidence that blacks were the true contributors of civilization. Then they introduced the image of a white savior, knowing that the subconscious mind will accept that image as fact. He explained that Asians, Chinese, and white people all had deities in their own likeness, and that black people were the only ones who were forced to accept a white savior. When Grace had asked why, Dr. Walker explained that it was a way of subconsciously programming black people to see the white man as their savior. Grace, a born-again Christian, wanted to know if Jesus was ever a real person. Dr. Walker had simply told her to research the Council of Nicaea. Europeans also used imagery to glamorize Victorian England as a high society through films such as Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice. In reality, England was riddled with disease such as the bubonic plague, brought on by the lack of hygiene. Europeans would only wash once a week, share bath water, and threw their toilet waste out of the window, as they had no sewage systems. This caused an infestation of rats, which caused all sorts of diseases. Africans taught Europeans the importance of keeping clean and also helped them develop a sewage system, as they had mastered this from way back in ancient Kemet. Women in Victorian times had no rights and were treated like property. They were financially dependent on their husbands and were perhaps unaware of how they accumulated their vast wealth. Many had invested in the slave trade and in buying enslaved Africans. Those poor women had no idea what their men were getting up to when they were away on voyages for months on end, or the amount of mulatto children they fathered as a result of the frequent rapings of enslaved African women. When the white man arrived in Africa and witnessed the high status women held in their community, they sought to break that down. They saw that the woman was the core of the family and that the family was the core of the community. If they could break down the psyche of the woman, they could break down the whole community. This would make it easier to steal the natural resources of the land, which is what they were really after. Other strategies used were assimilation, the process of civilizing Africans to become more like Europeans, and divide and conquer, setting the men and women against each other, light-skinned against dark-skinned, young against old, etc. Enslaved Africans were taught to believe that the lighter or whiter you are, the more superior. In Module 4, Dr. Walker taught his students all about the black heroes and sheroes, scientists and inventors, and conscious black leaders who had sought to remind their people of who they really are, including Malcolm X, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Khalid Muhammad, and Kwame Nkrumah. These were the real black saviours who had sacrificed their lives to save their people from white oppression. He also taught a lesson on chemistry, the study of melanin and its components and how it relates to the number 666, protons, electrons and neurons. Remember, they try to demonize anything to do with blackness, but when you know who you are, no one can make you feel inferior to them. Suzanne also does her own research. She discovers that Europeans were hell-bent on rewriting African history and replacing it with their own. An example of this would be when the British first visited Ghana in the early 1800s. When they saw the Ashanti king's palace, out of jealousy, they plotted to bring down his empire. From their own account, the palace was described as an immense building of a variety of oblong courts and regular squares with exuberantly adorned bold fan and trellis work of Egyptian character. They have a suite of rooms over them with small windows of wooden lattice, of intricate but regular carved work, and some have frames cased with thin gold. The squares have a large apartment on each side, open in front with two supporting pillars, They are lofty and regular, and the cornices of a very bold canework in alto relievo. A drop curtain of curiously plated cane is suspended in front, and in each we observed chairs and stools embossed with gold and beds of silk with scattered regalia. The Ashanti King's palace was burnt down and ransacked by the British in 1875. Upon his return from exile in the Seychelles in 1925, they presented him with a new, less elaborate palace, which still stands today. Learning about her rich history before slavery helps Suzanne develop self-esteem and racial pride. If she had continued to only study European literature and watch their programs about Africa on Television, she would have carried on believing that all indigenous Africans were starving and lived in mud huts. If Suzanne hadn't attended her classes, the only African history she would have known about was slavery. The descendants of enslavers loved keeping that part of history alive through films like Roots and Goodbye Uncle Tom to show how they had conquered the African nation. But would they fund a film that empowers black people? Our history didn't begin with slavery. Slavery interrupted our history. Mutabaruka. Reparations of the mind. Suzanne can now see how her people had been brainwashed. They'd been taught to fear God, who had been presented as a white man. This caused them to develop what Dr. Walker called the white savior syndrome, which made them believe they couldn't do anything without white intervention. They had also been taught to hate their dark skin and renounce anything to do with their culture, whilst embracing European culture. Despite their wealth of natural resources, the majority of Africans are still living in poverty because they don't value themselves, which allows others to take advantage of them. What they need is to develop love for themselves individually and as a community. To have love for yourself and your race doesn't mean hating anyone else. It simply means getting your priorities right. Suzanne is soon able to identify the descendants of enslaved Africans, those who still have the slave mentality, and the descendants of enslavers, those who still have the slave trader mentality. She notes that not all Africans and their descendants have a slave mentality, and not all Europeans have a slave trader mentality. Still, she recognizes the slave mentality within herself and begins the process of self-healing. After reading the Willie Lynch letter, she realizes that she is still carrying the trauma of her ancestors passed down to her genetically. She can now identify where her strong, independent black woman attitude came from, after learning how European enslavers devised a plan to systematically break in their captives. They would take the strongest male, tar him up, whip him in front of the whole community, tie each of his legs to a horse, then whip the horses so they would bolt, ripping him in two. The women were forced to watch. Seeing their strongest men ripped in two sent them into an emotional state of shock. The image of the black man whom she had looked up to was completely destroyed. She could no longer depend on him to protect and provide for her. She was then given a new leader, the white man, her oppressor. The women were raped by their captors in front of their men, who were powerless to do anything to stop it. Otherwise, they were likely to lose their own lives, or a limb, or to be whipped until the skin on their backs was raw. The strongest men were used as studs to breed the women to provide more stock, like animals. They were not allowed to marry in their prime, and because they never knew when their children were going to be taken away and sold, they formed no emotional bonds with them. They beat their children mercilessly as they were beaten to teach them how to comply. If they didn't do it, the slave traders would. The mulatto children, products of the frequent rape-ins, were treated better than the black children because they supposedly had better quality blood. Enslaved Africans were taught to believe that the lighter or whiter you are, the more superior you are. The women were trained to look up to the white man as their provider and to raise their boys to grow physically strong but mentally weak. Male captives had their warrior spirit whipped out of them and were reduced to nothing more than slave labour and baby-making machines. Within this system, enslaved Africans' whole way of life, culture, spiritual practices, names, language and heritage were stripped from them, but some still managed to carry them across the waters and practice in secret. The slave trade was run with brutal force, yet religion played a major part of it. In fact, churches were built right on top of the dungeons where captives were held before being shipped off the continent. While church services were going on, Africans were being held in squalid conditions right underneath. Europeans, through their religions, had managed to get blacks to believe that without a white saviour, they were powerless to save themselves, and to believe that earthly riches shouldn't be coveted. They used subconscious programming to embed beliefs such as, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. This made it easy for them to extract the wealth of Africa with little resistance and to program black people to remain in poverty. Any African leader who resisted colonization was either killed or exiled. Worse still, none of these wealthy Europeans were practicing Christians. They were living the life they had told Africans to wait to get in heaven. Many descendants of enslavers are still living off the profits from the transatlantic slave trade, which had enabled them to build generational wealth. When slavery was abolished, their ancestors were paid huge sums by the government in compensation for the loss of their stock, while freed Africans received nothing. As a result, many ended up having to continue working for their former enslavers for a minimum wage. This reminds Suzanne of Britain's bribe to her parents' generation. They were promised well-paying jobs to leave the Caribbean and relocate to Britain during the 1940s after the Second World War. The most educated people were targeted, but when they arrived, they were only offered low-paying jobs that the British didn't want to do, such as nursing, cleaning, factory work and bus driving. Suzanne's own mother had been a qualified accountant before arriving in England, but when she couldn't find work in that field, she was forced to retrain as a nurse. They had invested all their savings into relocating, sold their land and property, and had no money left to return to Jamaica. The Windrush generation had been duped into believing that Britain had streets paved with gold. How could she be sure that the holy books compiled by Europeans using stolen ancient manuscripts hadn't been tampered with? What if it wasn't all God's word? What if they had also lied about heaven having streets paved with gold? It's all in the skin. In Module 4, Suzanne learns what gives black people their colour. Melanin. This complex biochemical pigment, she discovers, is actually a blessing, not a curse. Brown to black in colour, melanin can be found in the skin, hair, eyes, brain and organs. It plays an important role in the function of the brain and nervous system and is concentrated in highly functional areas of the body, such as the genitals. When operating at its peak, melanin provides a natural barrier from cancer-causing UV rays, reducing the risk of skin cancer. It also maintains moisture in the outer layers of the skin, slowing down signs of aging. It absorbs and neutralizes free radicals and protects against radiation. Melanin is also found in nature and in the dark matter that permeates the universe,
and is what makes melanin-rich people
more attuned to nature. The darker you are, the more melanin you have. Suzanne learns that melanin is secreted from a small gland in the middle of the brain called the pineal gland, also known as the black dot or third eye. The pineal gland is a known link between the physical and spiritual worlds and provides the connection to higher consciousness, creativity, spiritual awareness, and being able to manifest in the physical world. Healthy melanin has the ability to absorb all kinds of energy, including ultraviolet rays and electromagnetic waves, which it then turns into energy for the body to use. Melanin is also stimulated by sunlight, sound, and colours. This amuses Suzanne, as she supposes that's why her people like to play their music so loud. However, unhealthy melanin affects the psyche negatively, causing the person to act in ways contrary to their true nature. Cocaine, pharmaceutical drugs, LSD, and other toxic chemicals change the structure of melanin, which can cause cancer and psychological diseases. Melanin is boosted by the sun's rays, fruit and vegetables, dopamine-rich foods such as turkey, plantain, eggs, almonds, walnuts, and cacao chocolate. Anything that is applied on the skin goes directly into the bloodstream, affecting all the other organs. Suzanne stops using skin lightening creams as she's not sure what effect they're having on her mind and body. She is introduced to shea butter products by another lady in the class who imports it from Africa. Dr. Walker encourages everyone to get a copy of Dr. Layla Africa's book, Melanin, What Makes Black People Black. It explains that vitamin B helps keep melanin clean, and that a natural diet for a melanin-dominated person is the food that Mother Nature provides: fruits, vegetables, herbs, water, nuts, seeds, beans, and sprouts, etc. He encourages his students to cut out meat if possible, or to make it a small part of their food intake. Up to this point, Suzanne would occasionally treat the boys to takeaways, but now she's becoming more aware of the effects of food on the brain. She decides to cut out unhealthy foods like burgers, sausages, fried chicken and chips, and incorporates more natural food in her cooking. She tries her best to reduce the amount of fake food from her shopping list, such as biscuits and crisps. Trying to get the boys to eat greens or seeds straight off the plate is difficult, but by blending them into the sauces or gravy, they hardly notice.
She begins to feel more focused, more energetic, and notices a positive change in the boys' attention and focus as well.
With everything she has learned in her African history classes, Suzanne wonders how it had been possible to get melanated,
melanin-rich people
to believe that they are the inferior race. She recalls how Europeans had treated Africans like less than animals during the African Holocaust. They justified their actions by saying that Negroes had no soul. They had in fact demonstrated their own lack of spirituality by treating their fellow human beings in such a barbaric way. And what makes a person spiritual? Spirit, ritual. In other words, to be spiritual is to perform ritual with spirit, an African tradition which these same Europeans had branded as evil before replacing it with their religions. Africans were made to believe that their traditions of paying homage to their ancestors and African deities were wrong, and were given a new religion which honours and makes offerings to a white god. Suzanne wonders how her ancestors would be feeling if they were looking down, watching their descendants. Would those who had sacrificed their lives for their people's freedom be happy to see them physically free, but still in mental slavery? and worse still, they didn't even realize it. The worst type of slave is the slave who believes he is free. Suzanne makes a conscious decision to trace her roots as far back as possible and to change her name to an African name to honor her ancestors. She believes that as long as the descendants of enslaved Africans keep their slave masters' names, they still have a spiritual hold over them. It must have taken hundreds, if not thousands of years to turn everything upside down. Suzanne wonders, how long will it take to turn everything the right way up again? Think kink. Suzanne also learns that a person can be identified by a single strand of their hair, even thousands of years after they have died. This means that whenever she buys human hair and puts it on her head, she's taking on someone else's identity. This causes her to think more seriously about buying 100% human hair. Not only was she suppressing her own DNA, but she was taking on the identity of someone she didn't even know. Whose hair was it? Was the person alive or dead? Apparently, it had been said that they were cutting hair from corpses to fill the demand for the huge wig and weave industry. They were even taking hair from the temples in Asia that people had shaved off to offer as sacrifices to their gods. Before, she had taken pride in saying the hair she bought was 100% human, but now she only buys synthetic wigs. She's not quite ready to give up her wigs and weaves just yet. They'd had a big discussion in class about this. Some of the brothers were saying the sisters were lost and suffering from a self-identity crisis, while the sisters defended their actions by blaming the men for going off with women who had long straight hair. Dr. Walker had explained the benefits of wearing natural hair. He said all energy travels in spirals, which means that curly hair acts as a natural antenna for the messages constantly being transmitted from Mother Nature and the universe. He also said that the fabled Medusa was based on a black woman with locks. Suzanne begins experimenting more with natural hairstyles. It takes a little longer for her to get ready in the mornings. Instead of just putting a wig on top, she now has to spray, comb and style it. Before, she used the excuse that it was quicker and easier to just put a wig on and that it was just a fashion accessory like wearing jewellery. But now she feels more confident about wearing her own hair out. It gives her a new sense of pride and identity. She isn't trying to look Indian or Brazilian anymore. Her hair is naturally kinky, and she's going to love and care for it as it is. The more she gets used to it, the more she comes to love its versatility. Walking down the street, she notices the woke brothers giving her approving looks. One even commented that there needs to be more sisters like her. Once a week, she goes to the gym to steam her hair with loads of conditioner, which helped make it easier to manage. Whenever she wants to treat herself or has somewhere special to go, she goes to the hairdresser to get it styled in a bespoke hairstyle. It could last a couple of weeks if she wears a silk head tie to bed. She realises that she looks just as good, if not better, with her own natural hair, and begins to embrace herself in all her natural beauty. Who am I? Suzanne realises she has a false identity, a mask. Living in the UK, following a religion that had been whipped into her ancestors, no mother tongue, cultural practices forgotten, inheritance stolen, she was so far away from home. Africa, her motherland, the womb of civilization. This is her roots. This is the beginning of her story. This is her heritage. All nations were birthed out of Africa. Her mother, father, grandparents, great-grandparents, ancestors. She wonders how she could have strayed so far as to lost sight of her own self. When it first dawns on Suzanne that her roots are actually in Africa, not the West Indies, it came as a big shock to her. How am I going to find my way back home? Moved by everything she's learning, Suzanne is led to write a poem.
Who am I? I am a remnant of my ancestors, torn from my motherland by the rape of slaves, traders. Who am I? I am a watered down version of an African queen. My blood is diluted, so mixed that it's now in between. My skin is no longer its original colour, rich, dark like black gold, the colour of tar. Yet still, I have royal blood flowing through my veins, for my ancestors were kings, queens, rulers, inventors, scientists, leaders. I am the descendant of a Kemetic dynasty, and I radiate my inner divinity.
She commits to using her gift of writing poetry to help free her people from mental slavery. The burning ritual. Suzanne downloads an image of the white Jesus from the internet and prints it off. Before starting her ritual, she gets a glass of water and pours libation into a plant, invoking the spirits of her ancestors for protection, as she had seen Dr. Walker do. She gets a lighter and, starting at the corner, burns the image to subconsciously separate herself from the white saviour programming that had been encoded into her DNA. As the image goes up in flames, she says, "Thank you, ancestors. I am free at last. Please guide and protect me on the rest of my journey." Narrated by the author, Suzanne Poetess. Intro and outro music by my youngest son, Azaba. Edited by my brother, Antonio Noel of Virgo 17 Productions. Music for poetry composed by Theo Caliste. Drumming by Chibamani. Download Year 3, Mind the Gap. You know, Christianity has given God a bad name. Instead of them preaching God is love, they prefer to preach hell and damnation. They say they're saving souls when they can't even save themselves. The Bible clearly says to work out your own salvation. It's staring them in the face, but they still refuse to believe that neither God nor Jesus said that the only way to get to God was through Him. They refer to a book that was given to them by the same people who enslaved their ancestors.